So I'm going to create here a little view, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a very simple representation of a Facebook story. Right? So a Facebook story is going to just be wrapped in this container view. All right, so I'm just going to make a bunch of gray boxes to outline maybe the hierarchy of stuff here. So color this gray, hit the little DJ slider for my properties, do a light gray color, and this will contain my story, right? So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that auto layout is enabled, right? So on the document tab here, auto layout is checked here. I have unchecked size classes. You can leave size classes on or off, it doesn't matter. But I kind of don't like working with that goofy, gigantic square because like I don't have like a 20-foot monitor. I can't fit all the squares on my screen. So I just disable size classes. So maybe I recommend that you do the same for now. So you can always turn them back on later, right? So as I mentioned on Monday, the beautiful thing about iOS is things are absolutely positioned. And that's so simple in concept, right? No flow, no crazy CSS layout rules, no complexities in doing column layout. It's almost a very naive, almost a kind of a very stupid way to do things, right? And where it breaks down is, of course, if I take this and now I run this on iPhone 6, then what's going to happen is this gray box actually don't totally know what's going to happen. It's gonna make some decision that I may or may not be happy with. So first I forgot to set this as my initial view controller. Let me run that again. So the question to ask yourself, so you see here, just left it here in the upper left, right? So the question to ask yourself is like, the question that auto layout answers is, hey, when the size of the phone changes, what do you want to do? There's a bunch of different answers here, right? So in this case, for example, the size of my phone, my parent changed, right? This is another way that my phone could have changed by flipping it, right? So the question is, what do you want it to do? So for example, Jeff, what do you think should happen with the width of this box?
Well, it depends on what we kind of want to do, but I think we could maybe expand the width so that it has the same pattern on each side.
Yep, exactly. So you can expand the width, you can keep it centered, and it really kind of depends on what you want it to do. You can even do a combination of both, right? Expand it up to a little point, but change the padding. What about the height? This is a Facebook story.
I don't know what we're going to do with it, but I don't know. Expand it as well. Fit the screen better.
Maybe, maybe not, right? Because like the width makes sense, but the height's driven by the content, right? So it kind of depends on what happens with the content. So the auto layout is all about answering this question: what do you want to do? And it's really, as you can see, it's a design question, really, right? Like what do I think should happen is in this kind of responsive design. So here are my auto layout controls. It's these three things right here. So I'm going to introduce these in turn. So I'm going to click. When you're applying auto layout, you click on each view and you start to specify the rules that say, hey, what do you want to do when this thing, the parent of this thing changes? In this case, the parent is the phone, right? So here, let's say that I want to pin it to the right. So uncheck constrained margins. Always uncheck constrained margins. Constrained margins is an iOS 8 thing. And so it won't work with iOS 7 if you leave it in there. What's going to happen if you forget? Nothing serious. The padding is just going to be a little bit off on iOS 7 because it's expecting a margin, but there's not one on iOS 7. So if you can, try to remember to uncheck this. And I'm going to pin this to the right-hand side. So you see this little red thing? I can toggle it on and off. And I'm going to pin this, and I'm going to add this rule. So constraint and rule, they're synonyms. So I'm going to add this rule. It says, hey, stay 14 to the right. And so we see these color indicators appear. So it turns out, and this is, by the way, the unhappy color, the unhappy yellow color. So if it's yellow, if you run it, it's going to be potentially broken. So the rule with auto layout is you have to keep on specifying rules until the rules give you X, Y, width, and height. Right? So If you're applying all the rules, you can somehow figure out x, y, width, and height. So for example, let me add a rule that says, hey, I want this to be 26 from the top, right? So I'm going to do this again. I hit this little red thing and add this one rule. So if I'm thinking about x, y, width, and height based on these two rules that I've added, which is be this distance from the top and be this distance from the right, which of those four numbers can you figure out based on these, like one of those like logic riddle things? So which one of these four numbers, x, y, x is this direction, right? 0, 0 is up here. X, y, width, and height. So let's give you a minute to think about that. So yeah, sorry. So I have two rules. Rule 1 is please be 26 pixels from the top. Rule 2 is please be 14 pixels from the right-hand side. Using these two rules, I'm going to try to determine x, y, which is the upper left-hand corner of this view, width, and height. So based on these two rules, again, it's like one of those like little SAT brain teasers. Based on one of these two rules, which one of these four numbers can I figure out?
Well, you can get the top left corner.
Top left. Anything else? So top left is top left and top right.
You get the height.
I cannot get the height.
Oh, you can get the width from the top.
I can't get the width either because I don't know where it starts on the left.
14.
So no, because like that's the tricky part.
Okay.
Like you see, this already has a frame. Does anyone remember what a frame is? The frame is just the four numbers, x, y, width, and height. So I've placed it here, and so you're like, no, just keep it here. But once you start adding the rules, only the rules matter, not where I placed it. So that's kind of the confusing thing, right? So people were saying, oh, I can figure out the height. Well, you can't because it's only going based off of the rules. It's not going based off what I sized this as. So let me kind of do the happy case where I kind of pin it to the left. So now I have this left pin, the right pin, the top pin, and I'm going to give it a static height. So now this is the blue lines of auto layout happiness. So yellow, sad, blue is happy. And these rules, these four rules, I said, please be this tall, be this far from the right, this far from the left, and this far from the top. So now if I run this on the iPhone 6, then it's stretched. It's stretched to respect the left and right width. So that's the basic game of auto layout, which is like coming up with these rules and making some decision, right? So there's two kind of rules that you can apply. There's these, I call this like my little TIE fighter. So there's the TIE fighter rules. These are all like the kind of the margin rules and the width and height. And then you have all of your alignment rules. So for example, I could have, instead of stretching the width, I could have just said, hey, center it in the container. Right, so like let's say that I were to delete this line right here, and then, oh, did I not have, okay, and delete this line right here. So I deleted the left and right rules, and then I'm going to say, well, just horizontally center me in the container, right? And then I'm going to add this constraint. And then because exactly I need not a height constraint but a width constraint, right? Because I've centered it, but it doesn't know how wide this thing should be.
That's where you said you have like a 400 by 400. That's where you want.
Exactly, and I don't want to change the dimension. I just want to center it here. Go ahead. So yeah, basically just determining the padding. Yeah, kind of, right? Like so, it can be more complex than that. But it's because you can actually get really fancy with these rules.
So if you were to set a fixed width that was larger than the device's screen size, and then I guess horizontally center that, would that just expand outside the bounds of the screen then, or would that actually not compile?
No, so you can freely bleed off the screen, right? In fact, that's very common because you know in iOS effects, many things come from off the screen, or overlap off the screen. So that's actually totally okay to do. So that's the basics. So let me try to introduce the complexities. So the complexities are, oh, you know what? I want to nudge this down a little bit. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to say, you know what? I want to kind of move it down a little bit. So, uh-oh, right? So like it's the yellow lines of sorrow, someone calls them, and I have, I have some indication that something's gone wrong. So unfortunately, you can't ignore them unless they're blue. You have to fix it. Otherwise, it's not going to do what you expect. So I'm going to move this down here. But you see, I'm going to run this anyway because I'm just crossing my fingers and hoping that it doesn't matter. And I see that it's moved it back to my original position. In other words, the rules always win. The place that I position this view, it doesn't matter. Once you use the auto layout rules, they are the ones that determine the position of the thing. So once you get into this state right here, then you have one of two choices. You can update the frame, or you can update the constraint or the rule. And so that's when the third. So now we've done 2 out of 3 of these controls we've looked at, right? So we've looked at the margins control, we've looked at the alignment control. So now we look at the third control, which is resolving auto layout issues. So I'm going to tap on this auto layout issue. And I notice that, so you see all of these options here. Don't ever click on anything except for these first 2. Right? I tell the engineers this too. So this is not because I'm, you guys are, I'm trying to keep it easy for you. I tell everybody this, right? So it's just one of these 2 choices. That's your only choice you're making here. So you can update the frame or update the constraint. So let's see what happens when I click update frame. So if I hit update frame, it moves me back to where I was. So in other words, it's saying reevaluate the rules and kind of fix it like that. But maybe you want to say, no. I actually want to move this down a bit. And I'm actually going to do that as well, right? And then I'm going to say update. So you have to kind of make sure the view is highlighted. Update constraints or update rules. So now, if you look at this, we're blue lines of happiness again. If I run this, then I see it's going to be kind of off there. But you might be wondering, like, wait a second, I thought you centered this horizontally. This doesn't look centered to me, right? But let me see if I can flip the phone. So if I flip the phone, it's kind of centered, right? But it's just offset a little bit from that center line. So this horizontal alignment, you see this all of these rules have properties as well, and so there's also an offset here for this center alignment. So like that's what it's preserving right now. It's being centered and then scooted over by the same amount in both cases. So let's turn this back to my Facebook story. And then again, I'm going to update constraints. And then I'm going to add in like my profile picture, maybe my name label, and then maybe like the text of the story. So for the picture, let's see if we can. Which rules do you all want to add here? Maybe from this screen first. Top and left. Okay, so we want to be top here. Anything else? The width.
It's taking when you pinned everything, it's taking those dimensions from nearest neighbor, meaning like.
Good question. So see this text, spacing to nearest neighbor. So if I don't want that, because sometimes I don't, I hit this drop down arrow. And so if I have more things on here, so let me escape that. So like let's say this guy, if I look and try to create a top pin, I can see that I can either create my rule with respect to my nearest neighbor or the one above it. You know, if I had a bunch of things on here, I can kind of choose. And you see how these are all uselessly named? They're all named view. So like if you want, you can name your layers. So these don't have any effect except for these types of things, but like this is maybe my, so just single click in here, my name view, and this is my story view. And if I click on this and try to create something here, then I can say, okay, well, I'm 13 from the name view, or 45 from the parent kind of container view. So I think we had added this, for this thing, we had added the top, the left, and then the width, right? Yeah, we do need, I think so, right? Because, you know, this profile picture, I don't want it to change the dimensions, right? So I'm going to create all of those things, width and height.
If you don't push add and just click off, it doesn't.
Yeah, exactly. So if I don't click add, and even more confusing, and this is the most confusing part, I think, or actually there's a lot of confusing parts. So if I now try to create this again, like that, it's actually bad. You see it's adding more lines. So this is it's an additive process, right? And so auto layout, when there's lots of things going on, it can be like a tangled mess of blue lines. That can be so hard to read, right? Frankly, I don't even try. Like once it gets to be a little bit insane, it's just a mess of blue lines, I don't even try. So what I do is I do one of two things. One I think will make sense, one I think will maybe make you sad. But if I click on this and I click on the ruler, I can see my list of rules here. So I can kind of, I go from the top left to the bottom right, and I'll just start to inspect the rules and say, okay, well clearly I don't need two of these. You know, nothing's broken about this, right? In one case, I'm creating a rule that it's equal to 13. In another case, but I'm saying also make it greater than or equal to 13. Well, okay, that just means it's going to be 13. But I can, you know, delete this rule, delete these kind of extraneous rules here. So that's one way I have of kind of inspecting things when things aren't going quite right. The second way, which will make you sadder, is I just delete all the rules and start over. Delete all the rules and start from the top, because once you get going, it really just takes you like a second just to, you know, do all the rules over again, because it can get so confusing that sometimes I do resort to that. So you can just kind of click on these and just delete all the rules that you have set up. So now if I, for this one, what do you think the rules for this one should be?
Preserve the left.
Okay.
The image.
Okay.
Right. You might want to expand.
Yep. Right to stretch it out. What's that?
Height as well.
Height. Okay. Anything else?
Would you apply like bottom here with the content block?
Good question. So the answer is either or, right? So if you apply, let's apply it now just for fun. This has nothing to do with my positioning, but it has something to do with my neighbor's positioning. So if I apply this bottom one right now, then see, I'm mostly happy. This thing is now ambiguous though. So for this guy, what should the constraints be for this one? So don't add the top again, because the top one already exists. You only need to do it once. So someone said right, left, bottom. Is that it? What about height and width? I'm not doing labels yet, so it's good, really excellent point. But let me cover that in 1 second. So let's just pretend that's a box, right? So if I hit run here, then this thing, which you know, like let's say I want to take this and I want to take this center line, Make sure it's exactly centered. Right, okay, so I just did a centering. So if I flip it now, that'll just stay centered as a story. Right, but before, I think let's revert to let it stretch. And so I'm going to add in pins for the left and the right. And then I see that, I mean, it's kind of anticlimactic, but basically this has stretched to fit the width. So is this internal one, right? And then when I rotate it, it's going to stretch all the way wide, right? So there's one more thing, which is, okay, let's say that I'm doing this and something was kind of weird here, which is, you see this error right here? It's really terrifying looking error. So the reason that happened was I actually had a width constraint here as well, right? And so this is the tricky thing. I added a bunch of rules which couldn't be applied together. I said, make it this distance from the left side, this distance from the right side, but don't change the width either. So I kind of created an impossible situation for it. And so literally it takes the genius approach of, it says, I'm going to just ignore one rule and then just try again, right? And so it says, and so basically you never ever want to see these types of printouts. If you do, that means you've kind of you've added too many rules. You've been a little bit too bossy. More rules. So with auto layout, definitely less is more. You don't want to get too crazy. For example, here, you see how I did a left pin right here? I could have also done an alignment constraint, right? So I could have control clicked on these. Both of these are selected. And I could have said, align the leading edges, right? But there it is, I've added it. But you know what? I would avoid doing those, being too crazy with alignments, just because it's not like Photoshop where you just do the alignments and it goes away. It's actually creating a rule that's there forever, which means that it becomes very easy to get into these situations where you're creating too many rules, and you don't have a supercomputer in your brain, so you maybe accidentally added one that can't technically be solved in some situations. Any questions about this so far?
How does this all relate to animations? So if you like rotate some view or something like that.
So the question is, how does this relate to animations? So can you give me an example of how that might relate to animations?
Like if you rotated if you changed like the X and Y position or rotated that view 90 degrees.
What happens to the rules? Right, because the rules are like pinning them there, right? So I guess the answer to that question is, we'll get to that when we get to the animations unit. But you're right, it's something that you do have to think about. It's kind of a long answer, though.
Okay. You change the way it animates when it rotates?
So like this, for example? Not easily. So this is kind of like, the way that you play this game is you just specify the rules, and then it'll kind of animate. Now, if you want to kind of do custom animations, so first of all, people don't usually do custom animations during rotation changes, because have you ever heard the rule that don't do too many animations at once? Because it just, I mean, users you can't follow that many animations. So this type of thing is it's such an aggressive animation, but like doing other animations tends to get lost in this motion anyway. So maybe the final thing that I'll cover is, I just want to illustrate how, like Amrita was pointing out, that this in reality is not a block. It's actually a piece of text, right? That has some content. So I'm going to delete this thing right here. I'm going to replace it with a label. So I'm going to make this label kind of this wide, and I'm going to add in the constraints just like I did with the view. So I'm going to add it from the left, top, right, and bottom. And then I'm going to change this property lines. 1 means that I only want this label ever to be 1 line. 2 means I'm happy with it being 2 lines, but at 2 lines it should truncate. 3 and so on. 0 means that wrap as many times as you want, wrap to your heart's content. So from the tip calculator, can anyone remind me, if I want to set this label to some long text, how would I do that? What are the steps there? What's that? If I want to change this label text to be something long, and I have to change it in code, right, like I did for the tip value, does anyone remember what I have to do there?
You have to create an outlet and then set that outlet to a particular variable.
Yep. So I have to go to my Swift file. So my Swift file is the code associated with. So I have to identify this. I already have this view controller as this view controller, right? So I'm going to take this label. Anything that you want to be able to manipulate in code, you have to name it. It's just like naming a child, naming a pet. You know, how do you make the dog come if you don't give it a name, right? What do you call it? Hey, you. You know, you have to give it some name, and so that's what an outlet is. It's naming the thing so you can refer to it, right? So I'm going to control drag over here. Remember how I told you always put your code in between the braces for functions? The exception is with when I'm naming these things. These names exist outside of that. So I'm going to say, oh, this is my name label. Right, and you want to name things like this: lowercase letter with kind of uppercase, and this you want to end with the word that represents the type that it is. That's for you to remember. So I'm going to hit connect here, and at this point, I've named this thing. Right, this thing is now called name label. So here in view did load, kind of like it sounds. It's a function that's run once when the view loads. So when the view controller boots up, you know, starts up, then it runs this, and you can do whatever you want here. So for me, I'm going to say name label, right? I can call it whatever. And then whenever I can call these things, I can press dot, and there's a bunch of things I can modify. These are all of the millions of properties I have access to. I can change the background color. I can change the font. I can change, you know, the shadow offset. I can change the corner radius. So the dot gives me access to all of the properties here. So text is the name of the thing in the name label that I'm changing. So I'm going to say set it equal to hello for right now. Just do a quick sanity check. So I can see that my label's been kind of correctly set to hello. And so let me just kind of set this to a long string now and see what happens. So I can see that not only did the label expand to fit the size of the text, but it also respected that margin that I created with that bottom thing, and it pushed this thing down. So any question? This has been kind of like my basic auto layout primer. Labels are the most complex things to work with by far. Everything else, I think maybe hopefully you'll get the hang of it. Rebecca?
So will the container, if you had a really long post, let's say, in the box, would the container itself expand given the rules that we set?
This container right here? Yeah, you can certainly make it expand to satisfy your sets of rules here. Right now, I've fixed the height of it.
But if you didn't, then it would respect the rules and grow.
Yeah, kind of. So, like, for example, when you have those types of situations, that's actually the thing I wanted to show next, which is not strictly related to auto layout. So there's a use case in Dropbox that I wanted to cover for you, which is I have here my Facebook feed where I have my long home feed that has like that long asset, right? These are really convenient. These are handy for us because they're convenient for prototyping. But as you notice that they weren't scrollable, right? So in this main storyboard, let me kind of create another view, another screen. And unlike HTML, you know, divs don't scroll by, I don't have like a scrollable region by default, so I actually have to throw it in there. So I'm going to create a scroll view. So this scroll view is going to just live in there, right? And remember, I have to apply auto layout to this scroll view, right? This scroll view, what it does is it's just a window, and it can contain really long or wide content. So what auto layout constraints should I add to this scroll view? What'd you say? Zero from all sides. Because if my phone grows, I want the scroll view, the region, to grow as well, right? So I'm going to click on my TIE Fighter, unclick constrained margins. That's iOS 8 only. Right click, click all the way around, and then add constraints. So now let me kind of show you a trick, which is, you see this, I want to throw this feed view in here, but it's going to be really tall. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on my view controller, click on my properties, and then change this to be a freeform view controller. And that is going to let me change the height of this thing. So sorry, I could have done it from this ruler. That would have been better. Freeform, and then change this to say like to be 1,000. Right. So now I have this really goofy long screen. But that's kind of nice because the Dropbox has a logout button that's down here. It's if you want to place your hit area like way down there, then this is one way you can do it. Now I'm going to take this home feed and I'm going to drag it into the scroll view. How would I confirm that this home view is inside the scroll view and it's not like on top of it? Open the layers view, exactly. So here I can see that it is correctly nested. It is correctly nested inside the scroll view, right? So now it has the potential to be scrolled. So now I'm gonna stop that. Let me make this a little bit easier on myself. I'm gonna run this on the iPhone 5 first. Sorry, move this arrow over to set the initial screen. And unfortunately, so I'm trying to scroll, but nothing's happening. So unfortunately, scroll views are kind of dumb in the sense that they don't really, they don't naturally understand they should be scrolling the things inside of them. You have to kind of tell it what to scroll. And so basically, I have to add some auto layout constraints again to this picture view that says, well, you know, I want you to be, say, zeros all the way around. Let's see, I need another 25 pixels to fit this image. So I'm going to make this view controller 1025 to fit my entire asset. Cool. And then so now for this image view, I'm going to say, well, I want you to be a certain width and height, right? And then this way, zeros all the way around. This is, imagine that's in the scroll view, and the scroll view is kind of like a hammock, right? A hammock, the way it works is if I push against it, it kind of stretches with me. So these bars serve to stretch out the hammock, right? And then this width and the height says how much do you want to stretch it out. So now I'm going to add these 6 constraints and hit run here. And so now, you know, I should be able to scroll this with the image height. And so now you see this natural bouncing behavior that you get with iOS. You can turn that on or off. My co-founder tried to convince me that Android's non-bouncing is actually superior. I was like, you are insane. That is clearly insane. So let me look at this scroll view. There's a feature of scroll view that you might like, which let me click on the scroll view and look at the properties. So there's kind of a cool effect, paging enabled. So if I click on paging enabled, I'll show you what that does. That you know how in Dropbox or Carousel you have those intro screens and they kind of like scoot over, but they don't let you stop anywhere, right? So here it's the same kind of thing. You see, like I'm only dragging it a little bit, and it's bouncing it back there. So it wants it to be on a border of the frame. So I don't know if you can tell what's happening based on my motion, but basically when I release it, it's snapping to a grid here. So that's a very common. All your welcome screens, guess what? It's going to be a free-form view controller, except it's going to be really wide. It's going to be a scroll view. There's going to be 4 image views inside of there, and then you can snap to scroll, and you can hide the indicator, because when you have those situations, you don't typically have indicators. So I think that's just kind of look at this. So there's sorry, one sec. So there's one more thing with the Dropbox homework, which is that feature where right when a page loads, it immediately transitions into another screen, right? Just by default. So let's say that once this screen loads, I want it to immediately present. I immediately want to take this segue, right? So I'm going to create a segue from this view controller to this other view controller. If there's no button associated with it, then I can just drag it from the yellow thing to create a segue. Can I make it a push segue here? No? How come? Push has to be in the context of navigation, right? So it has to be a modal segue. How do I change the animation properties of a segue? I tap on it, right? And then you see here, I can actually also give it a name. So this is going to be like my awesome segue. And let's say that I wanted to transition to this other view controller immediately. So this view controller right here, the way that I would do that is I call a method called perform segue with identifier. So that identifier is my awesome segue, and the sender is nil. So how did you know to do this? You have to kind of monkey see, monkey do this type of stuff, right? So this is always nil. 100% of the time this will be nil, right? So perform segue with identifier, just give it the name of the segue that you want it to do. And so if I run this, then I can see that I'm going to get this error that says I can't quite do this just yet because it's not quite ready yet. So there's another function instead of view did load. Let's try it here. View will appear. If that doesn't work, we'll try view did appear. Okay. It's just taking a little nap. So this happens sometimes. Just try to restart it. I just did a command Q. Okay, so finally, right when it loaded, it automatically did the transition. Right, and I want to kind of, now that we know auto layout, I want to direct your attention to this file, launchscreen.zib. It's kind of like what it sounds like. I'm sure you've noticed that your name is appearing here right when the thing launches. So, and it's on that square, right? You can leave it square, you can change it, but the beautiful thing about this is, it used to be, has anyone ever generated assets for a mobile engineer before? Mm-hmm. You know you have to generate millions of versions of the assets, right? For all the different things. You also have to generate many versions of the launch screen. So now with this, you don't have to necessarily. If I just want this to be like an image that stretches, then just put the auto layout constraints there, and it's going to automatically kind of apply the auto layout for this launch screen. So let's go ahead and do this lab today. So let me explain how the labs work. So the labs, we're going to do the second challenge. So there's two challenges here, Google and Facebook, and we'll do the second one, Facebook. So just scroll down here. So we're going to do this using a pair programming technique. Has anyone heard of pair programming before? Actually, let me stop the video real quick.